The proceeding will start shortly. 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 The proceeding will start shortly The proceeding will start shortly. 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 The proceeding will start shortly.
Missy, and thank you for appearing this morning. Your portfolio is considerable and covers areas of very great political and legal importance. And as Europe Minister, wearing that hat, you're partly responsible for the success of the relationship between ourselves and the other parties concerned. So today's session, we're going to ask you about the government's renegotiation of the Northern Ireland Protocol, the first year of operation of the Trade and Cooperation Agreement, the government's work with the EU on coordinating sanctions against Russia for its unprovoked aggression in Ukraine, and the status of negotiations on a trade and border agreement with the EU for Gibraltar. And before we start, Mr. Braithwaite, if you can catch your breath, having just managed to get here, you heard from you before in evidence, but just for the record, would you be kind enough just to introduce yourself?
Certainly. My name is Julian Braithwaite and I'm the Director General for Europe in the Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office.
Thank you very much indeed. So I'll start with the first question. I've outlined some of the things that we're going to ask, but if you'd be kind enough, Mr. Cleverly, to explain your ministerial responsibilities, specifically with regard to the Northern Ireland Protocol and the Trade and Cooperation Agreement, and how you see these fitting with the Foreign Secretary's responsibilities.
Thank you, Mr. So, William, the role that I have as Minister for Europe and North America means that in much of the work around the Northern Ireland Protocol negotiations and the TCA and our broader relationship between the UK and the EU, that I suppose I understudy for the Foreign Secretary, so I help her bear the load, because obviously as Foreign Secretary she has a very broad traditional role in her, in the Foreign Secretary role. With regard to the UK-EU relations, obviously there are a large number of meetings, often quite technical. I accompany her and have accompanied her on a number of the rounds of negotiations with Mr. Šefčovič and his team, both here in the UK and over in Brussels. And I maintain the intensity of the interaction between the UK and the EU. In fact, just yesterday, I was over in Brussels visiting members of the European Parliament, but also senior members of the European Union as well.
And you see the people in the mission, our mission as well, presumably.
Yes, and I regularly speak.
We did see quite recently.
Indeed. So I was over in part hosted by Lindsay, our ambassador to UCMIS. Sorry, our ambassador to the EU, UCMIS, Perm Rep. And so part of my job, as I say, is understudying the Foreign Secretary in this role, where she takes the primary responsibility, and a big part of it is just maintaining the intense level of interaction that obviously the UK benefits from having with the European Union.
And on the protocol, presumably you have to take a similar kind of position with regard to Brandon Lewis as Northern Ireland Secretary, that sort of thing. It's an interactive operation.
That's right. And again, I had regular informal meetings, both Brandon Lewis and Conor Burns as the ministers in the Northern Irish office. Obviously our officials work very closely together, and when we speak on Northern Irish issues, for example my recent trip to the United States of America, when I go to Washington, I always make sure I plug in with the NIO ministers prior to going to trips like that, and give them a download as well as the download that I provide to the Foreign Secretary.
And do they give you briefings so that you've got a complete picture? Because it's quite a big role.
Yeah, and I think it's worth, we do have regular structured cross-Whitehall meetings, but actually one of the big advantages that I found is that being able to have very, very regular informal exchanges is very, very useful. As we know, with many things to do with Northern Ireland, to do with our relationship with the EU, things can move quite quickly. Things can, conversations are had in multiple places around the same issue. And being able to regularly, informally compare notes means that the UK can put forward a consistent, considered position, whether we're talking in Northern Ireland, in the EU, in Ireland, in the US, and I have found that that relationship between the Foreign Office, the FCDO, and the Northern Irish Office has been working very, very well.
Good, thank you very much. Richard Drax, please.
Good afternoon, gentlemen. Minister, nice to see you. In July 2021, the government published the command paper Northern Ireland Protocol, The Way Forward. This set out proposals for reform of the protocol and was followed by intensive UK-EU negotiations. What progress has been made towards achieving the changes outlined in the command paper?
We have made progress. I think it's important to say that we have made progress. I think the Foreign Secretary and Vice President Šefčovič enjoy a good professional working relationship, and we do feel that Mr. Šefčovič and his team come with a desire to resolve this issue. The truth is that we have come to something of an impasse. And I don't think that's through a lack of goodwill. I think it's more through what we regard in the UK as an overly limited negotiating mandate that Mr. Šefčovič and his team have got. We have put forward a range of, we think, very effective and well worked through proposals for a technical way of addressing the EU's concerns about the integrity of the single market, which we believe addresses the concerns that they've raised with us. At the moment, Mr. Šefčovič hasn't been able to accept those, and as I say, I think his mandate limits him from doing so, rather than any lack of desire to get a resolution on his part. And I think, as I say, the reason I say something of an impasse is because whilst we have made progress, at the moment we're struggling to see how within the current mandate he's able to move forward. And the simple truth, and this is the point we've presented, is the situation as we now see it just is not working. It is not doing what it was meant to do, which is to protect equally north-south and east-west trade. And that, by extension, is causing community tensions in Northern Ireland, which we regard, which we feel are problems that need to be addressed.
Could you just tell us and our millions of viewers just what exactly progress has been made, bearing in mind clearly not as much progress has been made as you would like? How much, exactly what progress has been made?
We got a good resolution, for example, on medicines. And I think that demonstrates that where there is a real driver for innovation and reform, that can happen, and it has happened, and that's positive. And it's one of these things where you can nail down quite a few issues, but until you get the last one, you can't really get any of them delivered. So we're kind of hanging on a whole load of things where we could work, I think, more smoothly, more effectively, hanging on a couple of issues around the EU's concerns about the integrity of the single market. But again, it's this. I think one of the challenges is that we are now regarding this more about how we protect the Good Friday Agreement rather than a kind of a technical trade problem. And I think that's where the gap is between our position and the EU's position.
A colleague of mine will be touching on Article 16, but just before that happens, how much longer do you think will you continue to negotiate with the EU over this?
Well, we want a negotiated settlement. That we still regard a negotiated change to the protocol as the best way forward. We've made it clear that is our desired
If
outcome.
that's not possible, for how much longer will you go on negotiating? Because this thing's dragged on now for an awful long time.
Yeah, and things. I mean, pressure is building. As I say, our broader concern. So we have a standstill situation, which is far from perfect, and we have seen that standstill position has been driving community tensions in Northern Ireland. Our concern is that the EU's position is worse than the standstill position. So for us, that really is unacceptable, because the point we're making is the current standstill position, where we're not applying a number of checks that would have to come in under their proposals. That is already causing tensions. Their proposals, I think, we believe would make it worse, and we're saying it has to be better than the standstill. That's the challenge. In terms of how much longer, it really, we see these tensions building over time. The longer this goes unresolved, the more those tensions build. That is a deeply, deeply undesirable situation. The Prime Minister has made it clear that we will need to look at ways of addressing and alleviating those community tensions. Exactly when that happens, exactly how, exactly under what circumstances, I'm not able to say. and we're discussing what that might look like. But it is something that we do recognise needs to be resolved.
Queen's speech, as I understand it, will have something of this, will it not? That will help perhaps clarify this matter once and for all.
So we're looking at a range of options about what we can do to ease these tensions. I don't want to go further than that because conversations about the best mechanism, exactly when, exactly how, are still being made.
If I may, on the question of the essential issue of political stability, the contents of the protocol itself, the failures to be able to carry things forward as many people perceive them, the difficulty therefore of sovereignty, integrity, of territoriality, and also the whole question of the integrity of our constitutional arrangements with Northern Ireland. You only had to look at Northern Ireland questions to see how it cropped up over and over again yesterday. And of course we've got these Northern Ireland elections taking place in a few days' time. So it's not just a question of trading relationships, it's getting beyond that, and there are really serious questions, and it would be a different context, of course, but the question of sovereignty with respect to part of the United Kingdom being effectively impugned by an agreement which wasn't working is a very serious matter, particularly in regard to the political and civil issues that can arise in the context of Northern Ireland. And this question of sovereignty has been dealt with in the Withdrawal Agreement Act. Section 38 provides a mechanism for doing it, notwithstanding Section 38(2)(b), which is the one which deals with the question of direct applicability and direct effect. So that for practical purposes, there are some very, very major constitutional issues coming up. And of course, there is also the question of the reference to the Supreme Court of the Northern Ireland case, which has been around now for some months. So against that background, I think you perhaps might be excused for giving us a direct answer as to what's going to be in the Queen's speech. But the whole thrust of the sense of concern which has arisen, and the importance and the constitutional significance, surely, is such that I think we would find it quite surprising if there was nothing in the Queen's speech, if I could put it to you that way round. This is a fundamental issue of such importance that really, we would like to believe that these matters will be addressed.
William, I can assure you the concern that you highlight in your question is absolutely felt across government. We have seen that the implementation of the protocol and the disproportionate way it affects north-south and east-west trade has already driven the resignation of two First Ministers in Northern Ireland. We see the devolved government in Northern Ireland not established, not working. We have elections coming up soon. We really hope, of course we hope, that those elections get to a stage where the Assembly is up and running, but we can see those tensions are very, very real and building. We absolutely recognise the urgency of resolving the situation. I sometimes fear that when we highlight the strength of our concern about community tensions in Northern Ireland, some of the people we speak to, not just within the EU but more broadly, think that what we are discussing is a technical trade issue about products crossing borders. The point we are making is that many of us have lived through the Troubles in our younger years. We are absolutely determined to protect the Good Friday Agreement and not go back to that point in time and that circumstance. And the tensions that are building are the primary focus for our concern. Our belief is that the technical proposals we put forward address all the issues that the EU are concerned about with regard to integrity of the single market And by implementing our proposals, we could address their concerns and also alleviate the pressure, which are the big drivers for our concerns.
And there is also, because your responsibilities are so extensive, that you're obviously, as you indicated, also in touch with things that are going on, for example, in the United States. And it's quite clear from the report I've seen this morning that Mr. Coveney is going to see Mr. Biden. Now, it doesn't take much for us to put two and two together and to think, well, he's not going to see Mr. Biden for no reason, and it will be to do with the Good Friday Agreement, but it will also be to do, no doubt, with the impression that people are getting that we're reaching the end of the line, as it were. So, do you have any thoughts that you could convey to us on that issue?
Well, in the conversations that I've had both in Congress and with officials in the White House, they take the Good Friday Agreement very, very seriously, and I commend them for doing so. But obviously we are closer to it, both geographically, obviously, but this is something that we look at all the time and in detail. I do sometimes think that there is a bit of a misunderstanding of exactly how this situation is playing out on the ground. Okay. The American administration, no, not just the administration, right across the political spectrum in the US, take the Good Friday Agreement incredibly seriously, and we're pleased that they do. That's why we're highlighting the risk to the things that the Good Friday Agreement was trying to protect.
Okay, so David Jones, please.
And just on that point briefly, are the Americans aware of the reservations that people such as David Trimble have expressed as to the impact that the protocol is having upon the integrity of the Good Friday Agreement? Is that something that's being made clear to the Americans?
Well, I know that Secretary of State for Northern Ireland speaks regularly with senior officials and politicians in the United States of America. On my recent trip, I made the case that there are many voices in the unionist community in Northern Ireland who are expressing real concern. And these are people who don't have a direct political advantage in doing so. These are not people who are themselves up for election. These are people who are passionate about maintaining peace and security in Northern Ireland. And I do remind our American friends and European friends that they should listen to this range of unionist voices, because they are all expressing very severe reservations. No, stronger than that. They are all basically saying this is not working. And when peace builders like Lord Trimble are saying that they are worried, I think everybody should sit up and take note, because he doesn't say things like that lightly. We are trying to address, and the Prime Minister, the Foreign Secretary, Secretary of State for Northern Ireland, actually everyone in government is really focused on making sure that we don't see Northern Ireland slip back into violence at all. And we feel that this is one of the things that we should address to prevent that from happening.
I don't know whether you've seen it, but last month this committee published a report on the EU Commission's work programme for 2022. And we identified that there were at least 29 proposals for new or amended EU laws that Northern Ireland will have to apply under the dynamic alignment that arises under the protocol. We actually described it as a motorway of EU-derived legislation coming into Northern Ireland. Do the government's proposals for reform, the proposals that we've put to Maroš Šefčovič, draw attention to this particular problem? And are there any suggestions as to how to stop the motorway of legislation coming into Northern Ireland?
I will have to confess that I would need to look back again at your report to see the which bits of legislation are most likely to have an impact on the issues that we've been discussing with Mr. Šefčovič and his team.
I think what we're more concerned about is the principle of dynamic alignment. because it's inevitable that whenever a piece of legislation comes from the EU that is covered by the protocol, then it will have to be taken on board by Northern Ireland. I mean, as a matter of principle, has the government put forward proposals to stop that state of affairs continuing?
Well, as I say, the point that we've been making to the EU is that the situation as we currently find it, even with the decisions from or the decision not to apply the elements of the protocol which are as drafted, is causing problems, and anything that pushes us more towards that misalignment between communities, anything which affects that foundation stone principle of the Good Friday Agreement, is something that we're not willing to see. I mean, I don't want to speculate further without, and my fault. I should I'll recheck that list of legislation that you speak about. But our broad principle is that there can be a dynamic, flexible, pragmatic working relationship between the EU, the UK, when it comes to Northern Ireland. If we can establish that as a principle, that we are good faith actors, that neither is trying to disadvantage or harm or hinder the other, and that in all respects we look at the unique history and the importance of maintaining peace and security in Northern Ireland, we can have an effective way that works for the future. And I think that's the principle that we need to embed. And at the moment, the situation isn't providing us the comfort that we would want in terms of that community tension.
Well, you speak of a dynamic working arrangement. Does that include inevitably dynamic alignment between EU legislation and Northern Ireland?
I'm conscious that terms like dynamic alignment have a very specific meaning and impact, and I wouldn't want to sign us up to anything inadvertently by
Well, that's
a
why I
misuse
raised
of
the
words.
question,
I know, by
because you
misuse
used the
of
word
words.
dynamic arrangements.
Yeah. I might bring my officials in on I say officials, I'll put you in the plural, like the Her Majesty the Queen. I mean, we have. So our proposals are to have a dual regulatory approach for goods, and we're challenging the EU on legislation that we think should not apply in Northern Ireland. I don't know, Julian, if you want to more detail on that.
So, I mean, one of the real issues, of course, is the dynamic alignment that is written into the protocol. I mean, as you know, there are 50 pages of annexes to the protocol which set out all of the laws of the EU that will apply directly or through the application by UK law in Northern Ireland. That has an immediate impact on the sale of British goods in Northern Ireland. So our proposal to deal with that immediate issue about Northern Ireland being able to access British goods in the normal way, and for British manufacturers to be able to sell their goods in Northern Ireland because they meet British regulations, is that there should be a dual regulatory approach to deal with that issue. The whole issue of dynamic alignment, of course, is hardwired right into the protocol over 50 pages, and therefore that gets right to the heart of an issue that we've always said is important, is that the protocol does require substantial change, and it needs to be amended. So that's the fundamental point where we and the EU have...
Well, thank you for that, but so that we have absolute clarity on this point, is it the position of Her Majesty's government that we want to put a stop to dynamic alignment?
So the immediate issue is around the goods flowing into Northern Ireland and the dual regulatory approach.
I understand that, but
and the command paper does set
the government wants to put a stop to dynamic alignment. Is that right?
We can't have a situation. So I keep going back to what for us really now is a foundation stone principle, which is the desire to ensure that principle in the Good Friday Agreement, that all communities should enjoy equal esteem and that nothing should happen through the protocol or the future amendments to the protocol, which would undermine that. And if that east-west flow of goods is curtailed, as we are seeing at the moment, then that would be something that we feel would be an unacceptable situation. Exactly how we resolve that, again, I don't want to kind of paint ourselves into a corner as to how we protect that principle, and I wouldn't want to kind of limit our.
So to
our
summarise,
position for the
and
future.
forgive me interrupting, but to summarise, you are unable to tell the committee now as to whether or not the government's ambition is to put a stop to dynamic alignment. Is
Well,
that
our ambition is to make sure that East-West trade is not curtailed.
I understand what your ambition is,
Yeah.
but
How we protect that ambition,
Yes.
I don't want to limit my options.
so I'm correct in saying you can't help the committee with that in this particular session.
I don't want to make a hard and fast, we'll never do this, we'll never do that, we'll never do that.
That's fine, but so long as we understand what the position is, that's helpful to
We
the
were
committee.
proroguing today, and would I right in saying that you're not going to be in a position to let any cats out of the bag at this stage?
Very wise, Sir William, very wise.
I think, Minister, if you just said that, we'd have all understood that. Let me ask you this question as a political question. Do you think that dynamic alignment under the protocol is compatible with the sovereignty of Parliament?
Well, I mean, again, protected principles, almost like foundation stone principles, are about self-determination of the people of Northern Ireland. We have a devolved government in Northern Ireland. We want to make sure that, as I say, nothing is done which undermines either that sovereignty, the sovereignty of the UK government, and the ways that we protect that, as I say, we will always have that as foundation principles, and we will seek always to protect that in however we move forward. I'm not sure I'd go quite as far as to say I'm not sure. Yeah, I wouldn't say it is incompatible, but I can absolutely see how it could, if we if we are not careful in terms of how we in terms of our interrelationship with the EU, I could easily see how changes on the EU side could apply or could introduce pressures that we are seeking to protect from.
If we go back to the Brexit referendum, one of the principal issues, of course, for those of us who were opposed to Britain's membership was the fact that we automatically absorbed legislation from Brussels without any input from Parliament. In other words, it was incompatible with the sovereignty of this place. Do you think it's compatible with the sovereignty of Parliament, now that we've left the European Union, for part of our country still to be subject to dynamic alignment?
Well, I mean, Northern Ireland is part of the UK, and we will always protect that. And that is again, I keep talking about these foundation principles. That is the starting point for whatever discussions and negotiations we have. Northern Ireland does have a unique history. It does have a unique status, and we have to recognise that. And that means that in Northern Ireland related issues, and particularly when it comes to international obligations and treaties and just the practicalities of working in an interconnected world, that forces upon us a degree of extra creativity and flexibility and adaptability. And if we all approach, when I say all, UK and the EU approach all UK Ireland border related issues with that spirit, it can work. But I think it's and I think the point perhaps behind your question is that none of us should be blind to the fact that it does require us to be more adaptable, more pragmatic, more creative when it comes to Northern Ireland because of its unique history, because of its unique status.
But the point I'm seeking to make is that the sovereignty of Parliament is surely incomplete for so long as Northern Ireland is a rule taker and has alignment with the European Union.
Well, I mean, the Good Friday Agreement, I think imposes a duty upon all of us to protect the desire, to protect the status that is enshrined in it, that people in Northern Ireland should have that, should enjoy that relationship with Ireland, that relationship with the rest of the UK, and that means that there are some things that are more technical, more difficult, in order to ensure that all communities in Northern Ireland can enjoy the status that is protected by the Good Friday Agreement. I'm not going to imply, I wouldn't want to imply in any way that we're uncomfortable with that. It just means there's a bit more tricky work to do to protect that, but we are absolutely willing and able, and we think with regard to the Northern Ireland Protocol, we have put forward solutions to the EU, which does ensure that whether people's head and heart are more orientated north-south or east-west or whatever, that we protect that.
Thank you very much.
Anne-Marie Morris.
Thank you, Chairman. Does the government believe that the conditions that currently exist to trigger Article 16, given all that you've said?
Well, the Prime Minister said a number of months ago, I think perhaps almost a year ago, that the situation as we see with the current standstill position would be legitimate grounds for triggering Article 16. We're very conscious that that is a significant thing to do. We are very keen to get a negotiated settlement with the EU that resolves these issues, but ultimately Article 16 exists for a reason. Those community tensions in Northern Ireland are real, and we have committed to do what we can to alleviate those tensions. Exactly when, exactly how, that's a level of detail that I'm not going to go into today at this committee, but we're very conscious that things need to be resolved.
So, Minister, the government is committed to Article 16 still being a tool which it will use.
It's there in the agreement. It exists for a reason. It exists because problems, even though specific problems were not necessarily envisaged, the idea that there may be a need to resolve differences and disputes and to address issues, whether it be trade diversion, community cohesion related issues. Article 16 exists because those potential challenges were envisaged, so of course it is relevant, it is there for a reason, and from the UK government point of view, we've always made the case that we will look at resolving those issues. We're not just going to sit back and be passive and allow these problems to intensify.
And Minister, has the possibility of triggering Article 16 been used actively and discussed in your negotiations so that, if you like, those involved in the negotiation on the European side are well aware that we are serious and this is something which we will use?
Yeah, so I think the point is, and I don't want to imply this is your starting point, but this isn't a point of negotiating leverage. So we're not saying if we don't get our way, then we'll do this thing, as a leverage point. What we're saying is there are problems. These problems are real and intensifying. Article 16 exists as a means of addressing these problems. Those are facts. And we are going to have to look at ways of addressing these problems. Our desire, the best way of addressing these, is for the EU to give Mr. Šefčovič a bit more flex in his mandate, to negotiate a to get a negotiated position with regard to the protocol that works, and then we can get on with a whole load of other really important stuff that we want to get on with. That's our desired position, and this is the point we have made. But ultimately, what we have said, and as I say, I'm not going to go further in terms of what and when and how. But ultimately, we do have to resolve these issues because they are getting worse.
Before you come on to the next part of the question, if I may, Anne-Marie, I also just wanted to refer back to the appalling situation which we witnessed over the question of COVID regulations when Article 16 was actually used by, albeit only for a short space of time, by the EU in a manner which gave an impression of being both aggressive but also completely unreasonable, so that they have track on this. I heard Mr. Byrne, the Europe Minister for the Republic of Ireland this morning, I think it was, on the Today programme, or was it last night, indicating that that was just a sort of passing moment and it would all be shelved, and I think he more or less said, but I wouldn't like to be completely clear about this at this stage, that he thought that it had been disposed of. My understanding is that it's actually still part of the legislative arrangements within the EU, albeit it hasn't been used, I accept that, but the very implication of the manner in which it was done then, without any justification, was a very serious step, and it withdrew from it. But have you got any comment on that?
Well,
maybe Mr. Braithwaite would like to come in as well.
I've met with Mr. Byrne, and unsurprisingly, we discussed this issue. I absolutely take him at his word. I have no reason to doubt the sincerity of the point that he has made. I think in that. On the one hand, it feels very immediate. On the other hand, it feels like a different universe. When we were in the middle of that international response to COVID, when decisions were made, very, very quickly, I think there are things which, in the cold light of day and with the benefit of hindsight, we might do differently. I suspect I didn't hear the interview, but from the conversations I've had with him and what you relay from his interview, I think that sounds if it echoes his position. I don't want to put words in his mouth, but it sounds if it echoes that position. We continue to have a strong bilateral relationship with Ireland. I can't remember the exact date, I'll be visiting Ireland soon in my ministerial capacity. And we want to work towards an outcome where things, where the utilisation of Article 16 is not necessary. That is our desired outcome. But at the moment, our view is that the thing that will resolve that, the best and most effective way of resolving that is a bit more flex on Mr. Šefčovič's negotiating mandate, getting the amendments, getting the changes to the protocol, getting those negotiated changes, and then we can get these things resolved. That's our desired outcome.
Thank you very much, Anne-Marie.
Thank you, Chairman. Is the government considering the introduction of legislation to disapply parts of the protocol in domestic law? And if so, when and what will it cover? And I'm not asking you, Minister, to tell me what's in the Queen's speech, but I am asking you to tell me whether the government is seriously considering such legislation which would disapply the protocol in domestic law, and whether we're looking at something short-term, long-term.
Well, as I say, I'm going to go back to the kind of answer that I gave really to your question on Article 16, which is, we're driven by a desire to resolve the issues that we can see building up in Northern Ireland, particularly these community tensions in Northern Ireland. We are looking at the best and most effective way of doing that. We have said that we are considering what options are available to us. I'm not comfortable going into any more details because, as I say, we are discussing and thinking about the best way of doing this, protecting the things that we want to protect. So we want to obviously protect trade and commerce in Northern Ireland. We want to protect our international relationships, but first and foremost, the most important thing for us is we want to protect peace and security in Northern Ireland.
So, Minister, in the spring statement, as I recall, the Chancellor suggested that there would at least be a negotiation with regard to the application of VAT on, if you like, green infrastructure, if I can put it that way, because there was a perception that it would be very difficult to reduce the VAT on such infrastructure, if you like, on mainland as well as on Northern Ireland because of the protocol, and there would therefore be debate. So is that the sort of thing that would require, given we've already had the announcement in the spring statement, such legislation, and is that something which is being discussed?
Well, as I say, we are thinking about and we are discussing a range of things that we could do to address those tensions, and that's always the driving force. It's addressing these tensions. That's the thing that we're seeking to do. Exactly how we do that, as I say, we've not finalised that, and we are looking, or we are discussing the best way of addressing those tensions whilst also protecting the other things that we feel need to be protected as well.
Would you agree, Minister, that it is perhaps breaking the concept of sovereignty, that a country cannot impose levels of taxation across all its territory as of right? Now, I think we all understand that one of the points of the protocol was where there was a concern about products moving across border and the implications and the impact that might have for the EU and indeed for the UK going the other way. But there are some things, so for example, energy in people's homes, your gas, your electricity, and there's a peculiarity of the way it's looked at within VAT legislation so that it gets caught and can't be separated from the treatment of VAT in mainland Britain. Now, actually that could be tested in court. It is something the government could look at, but that seems to me an example of something which would be precisely right in terms of desire to retain sovereignty, and something which actually wouldn't negatively impact the EU, because the way we use gas and electricity within our own homes isn't going to impact trade between, if you like, north-south, east-west. Would you agree with that sense and position with regard to taxation, and that being something which fundamentally should be the sovereign right of the state, and something therefore the government will be taking seriously to try to address?
Yeah, I can absolutely see the point you're making. I can absolutely see the point you're making. And again, one of the things that is really important is that people in Northern Ireland are not and do not feel themselves to be disadvantaged by virtue of the fact that they are in Northern Ireland. Ultimately, we want to make sure that decisions by the UK government, particularly decisions by the UK government, which alleviate some of the cost of living challenges that we've seen, are enjoyed by everybody. Ultimately, of course, we want to see the devolved government in Northern Ireland up and running, because that is the most effective way of making sure that Northern Ireland can protect its unique status and character, whilst also enjoying all the benefits of being part of the Union.
Thank you, Minister.
Thank you very much indeed. Now, Greg Smith, would you be good enough to ask the next questions?
Thank you, Chairman. Good morning, Minister. Mr. Braithwaite, if we can broaden the discussion out to the TCA now. The opening question, which I appreciate could end up with quite a lengthy answer. The TCA has clearly been operational for over a year. The exam question is, how would you assess its first year of operation?
Yes, well, I've not had the opportunity necessarily to see the whole of the infancy and growth of the TCA, having only stepped into the portfolio in the last few months. But it is now in place. It's up and running. The governance structures that it has within it have been established, and they're happening. For example, like all this, the specialised committees are established. They have all met at least once. I think it's fair to say. The Partnership Council and the Trade Partnership Committee are up and running. The Parliamentary Partnership Assembly is up and running. So these structures that are embedded within it are working. Obviously, but it is still in its infancy. It is still new, and some of the elements of it have only come into meaningful existence very, very, very recently. And it does give the UK and the EU the opportunity to have regular interactions around the trade-related issues, which I think is valuable. It is not setting off alarm bells at the moment, which I think for a new institution like that is not a bad starting point.
I appreciate that answer. You stated in there, and we've had an evidence session on this as a committee before, that the specialised committees have all met at least once. What is less clear is what they actually did. So could you perhaps expand a bit more on where the UK government's position is on what came out of the sittings of those various committees and partnership boards that has actually led to something meaningful change to fix some of the unintended consequences, the unforeseen issues that we've perhaps seen at the border, that when the TCA was signed we didn't expect to have happened, but have.
I'm actually going to ask Julian to come in on that. I think it's fair to say in broad terms that these are relatively new structures, and coming straight out of the traps, straight into delivery phase, would be right at the upper end of anyone's range of expectations. I think these structures do reflect more perhaps the way the EU works than the way the UK government works, but in a partnership, of course, you need to make sure that you respect each other's ways of working. But Julian, I don't know if you bring up specific examples.
Just before you do, I ought to mention that actually there are things going on outside this room regarding prorogation, and we are getting to a point where we could easily find that Parliament will be provoked within, I would say, 12 minutes or so.
Right.
In which case, I'm truncating some of the questions.
I completely
and
understand.
I would be very grateful, therefore, because there were one or two matters, including a question of Gibraltar and Ukraine, which we do just want to touch on. First of all, though, I'd ask David Jones if he would ask the next question, if you don't mind, Greg, because otherwise we're going to get out of time and there won't be a Parliament sitting.
I'll try and break the habit of a lifetime, William, and give concise answers.
Yes, and it's essentially to do with the checks that were introduced by the EU on the 1st of January 2021, full border checks. We've heard reports of British businesses facing difficulties, EU VAT and customs regulations being applied differently by different member states. Do you recognise these reports, and if so, how is your office working with your EU counterparts to try to resolve the difficulties?
You may not have seen it because it was only laid this morning, but a written ministerial statement was laid this morning, that remaining import controls on EU goods will not be introduced from July 2022. Instead, traders will continue to move their goods from the EU to GB as they do now. So that is the situation as per.
So what it effectively means is that EU exporters to the UK can continue to do so without any checks, whereas in the opposite direction, British exporters are being subject to those checks. Are there any discussions to try to resolve those difficulties?
We actually, Julian.
Sorry,
yes.
Mr. Braithwaite.
No, go
yes,
on.
would you like to?
Because he cut straight to the technical bit. But
So, I mean, you're right. We've been getting these reports, and we have been raising. I mean, the EU customs code is implemented by the individual member states, and where we think, when we've heard of cases where they've been implementing them in ways that we don't think are compatible, we've been raising those with the individual member states. We haven't got any evidence that this has been systematic, but we have been raising the individual issues. I mean, in terms of the trade figures over the last year, actually the UK exports to the EU have held up, and so there are plenty of individual cases where we are, and the new service that was set up, the European Export Service, is sort of following up on those details to support our exporters, but we are raising those specific issues with the member states concerned.
All right, if that's all right, David, I'd like to move to Ukraine. Margaret, if you'd like be good enough to ask the question you want to ask on
Chair.
that.
Good morning, Minister. In a recent letter to the committee, the Foreign Secretary stressed the importance of working in concert with European counterparts on sanctions against Russia. How is the government working with the EU on the imposition of sanctions against Russia? And how is the government working with the EU to broaden and coordinate the coalition of countries currently imposing sanctions?
Well, I think the impositions of sanctions against Russia in response to the invasion of Ukraine is one of those areas which has really demonstrated how effectively we can work with the EU, even though we are no longer formally a member state of the EU. And coordinated sanctions don't mean that they are identical. We, for example, moved further on oil and gas and on banking. Elements of the EU moved faster on sanctioning of oligarchs because their legal structures allow them to do so. But we were all pulling in the same direction, and we are jointly applying that pressure. We speak regularly, both at ministerial level, senior official level, political director level, about making sure that we coordinate to have the maximum effect to close off the supply of funding for Putin's war machine. I do think in all the conversations that I've had here in the UK and in the EU, our coordination of work over sanctions is highlighted as one of the real success stories of our response to this
question, if I may, as Chairman, I'd just remind you, I mentioned Gerard Schroeder in the House the other day as an example of somebody who I thought really deserved sanctions in the circumstances. I just want to get that on the record for this session, but you know,
well, as you know, we never comment on future sanctions designation, but I think the point that you made, well, I know the point that you made has been heard.
Okay, thank you. Margaret.
Sure. Yeah, you mentioned energy, Minister, and the EU's dependency, we know that, on Russian energy. Could that limit the appetite of member states for more stringent sanctions? And how is the government assisting the EU to decrease consumption of Russian gas and to persuade member states to impose tougher energy sanctions?
Well, so we have been working closely both with our European colleagues and with colleagues in other parts of the world, including North America and the Gulf, and further afield, about alternative energy provision to alleviate some of the pressure that some European states are under. I must say that and I know sometimes there's an instinct to be critical, but I think we need to recognise that for some countries, particularly the further east you go in Europe, the more integrated their economies always have been and the more integrated their hydrocarbon supply chains are with Russia. Some of those Eastern European countries have taken incredibly brave and difficult decisions about imposing sanctions, knowing that Russia had this ability to damage their economies, and nonetheless, and Poland have done so, Romania have done so, Germany with regard to scrapping Nord Stream 2 and coming out of elements of the SWIFT banking system was done fully in the knowledge that they were highly at risk of repercussions from Russia, and nevertheless they did that. We want to help them and work with them to go further, recognising the best way of doing that is helping them get alternative hydrocarbon energy in the short term, but ultimately, the Prime Minister's absolutely spot on. The most effective way of doing this is weaning ourselves off Russian hydrocarbons completely within Europe, and ultimately to be much more energy self-sufficient, whether that be through renewables, nuclear, or whatever else.
Yeah. So on the 7th of April, the government published its energy security strategy. Do you agree, Minister, that the role of cooperation with the EU will be so important in securing long-term UK energy security?
Yes, working with the EU will be an important part of it, but ultimately the UK is a very international, at our heart, we've always been a very international country. We've always had a very international outlook, and I think as our energy needs evolve, as we move away from hydrocarbons towards other energy sources, it will mean that we need to develop and maintain relationships with many other countries around the world. Of course, working closely with the EU will be part of that, both for our benefit and the benefit of the EU member states, but we will also need to look at sourcing materials for battery technology, for example, sourcing materials for wind energy technology, where we have real strengths and very strong potential markets. And of course, the other one is working internationally in coordination with regard to the next generation of smaller, cheaper, more efficient nuclear energy production as well. All of these things require international work, both in the UK-EU relationship and the UK global relationships as well.
There is one other point, if I may, and that is with respect to the role of Germany in all this. I know the best way to keep a secret is to make a speech in the House of Commons, but actually, in 2001, I did write an article about the geopolitical instability that I could see coming as a result of the deal that was done in 1990 between Kohl and Gorbachev, and then taken up by Merkel, and all the dependence was in return for the reduction of debt. Under the Paris Club arrangements, because Russia owed so much money to Germany, and Germany was entitled to take shares in companies which became Gazprom and so on and so forth. So actually this is a long-standing series of mistakes and failures that have been made over a period of time, which is now effectively turned into a situation in which Russia is being able to hold people hostage over this, and the cutting off of gas with Poland and Bulgaria only yesterday is a good example of this. So it's an extremely long-term problem, and I just wanted to ask if you could reflect on that, because the German position is still not satisfactory for all the promises that we've been hearing.
The point that, having spoken with my German counterparts and having looked at this, I can understand the long-standing German foreign policy desire to bring Russia into the international community by integration of economic activity. I think it was an understandable aspiration, and it was a policy that transcended a number of German governments of all political, pretty much all political persuasions. It didn't prevent Russia from invading Ukraine, and I think the willingness that the new German government have had to fundamentally review some incredibly long-standing positions, both in terms of their own defence expenditure, in terms of their own foreign policy, in terms of their own energy policy. The willingness to accept that long-standing policy had not had a desired effect, and that they would revisit a number of really, really key and long-standing policies, I think is something which we should recognise, and we should, if not celebrate, but we should certainly thank them for. We want to make sure that we work with them and Poland and Bulgaria and other countries that are at risk of energy blackmail from Russia. We want to work with them to help them do what they have told us that they want to do, which is do the right thing.
The money that Russia is receiving is so monumental that, as I said again in the House recently, the reality is that Russia is being put in a very powerful position on this, and that basically the money that's coming from Germany and from other countries is bankrolling Russia's invasion and war in Ukraine. It's a very serious problem, and it was only a matter of weeks ago I had to mention in the House that Germany had only supplied 5,000 helmets, I think it was, something like that. And that was admittedly changed, but the question is, where's the beef and what's actually happening, and what's your assessment of that?
We come at this situation from very different starting points internationally. The UK has had at the time of the invasion, very, very low direct exposure to Russian hydrocarbons. We didn't rely on them very much. That enabled us to be much more flexible. But I think announcements like scrapping of Nord Stream 2, coming out of much of the SWIFT system, a very, very deep change of German defence posture. These were not easy decisions for
Well, they haven't made them yet, because to some extent there are big divisions within the coalition, are there not?
Well, coalition governments. I think to an extent that is a byproduct of coalition government. Look, I'm conscious I'm sounding slightly like a spokesperson for the German government, but we have enjoyed incredibly close working relationships across Europe. Also within the Quint, we have weekly calls at political level between the UK, US, France, Germany and Italy. I know our senior officials speak very, very regularly, and there is a degree of integration and coordination which has really confounded Putin's expectation that there'd be some Western fragmentation. I think every opportunity that we can find to reinforce that coordination and to reinforce decisions which are taking European countries in the right direction, which is unplugging from Russian hydrocarbons and implying sanctions on Russian hydrocarbons, is one that we should pursue. And not everyone can move at the same pace because, as you say, Sir William, in your question, there are a whole load of historic decisions, and particularly those countries in Eastern Europe that were formerly part of the USSR. They have got physical infrastructure linked to Russia, which they depend on. They are seeking to extricate themselves from that, and it is in our interest, their interest, and indeed the interest of global peace and security that we help them do that.
There is the complexity of the Hungarian situation and various other matters. I don't think we can go into every detail on this at this moment, but I wanted to just get your reaction to that. And also to say that we want now to move on to another set of questions relating to Gibraltar. Mr. Jones, would you be good enough?
Yes, thank you. Mr. Cleverly, you wrote to us recently setting out what the current state of play was, and still expressing confidence that you would be able to achieve a solution, although you did acknowledge that the negotiations were politically complex. There's been quite a lot of delay, apparently. We took evidence from the Gibraltarian Chief Minister back in November, in which he was expressing hope that we would see a resolution of the negotiations by the end of December, which was then extended to Easter. Still no sign. Could you give us a flavour of why the negotiations are taking so long, and what is your best guess as to when an agreement will be achieved?
I'm going to start by not answering the last question. I don't want to guess at a date and make myself a hostage to fortune. But we obviously enjoy incredibly close and strong working relationship with the government of Gibraltar. I've known the Chief Minister for long before I was in this ministerial position. I've now got to know my opposite number in the Spanish government, and we get on very well, and we speak formally and informally quite regularly. So the ingredients are in place to get resolution on this. It started much more slowly than I think any of us would have wanted. The EU's internal processes only finalised their negotiating position in October 2021. So the starting gun wasn't fired until much, much later than we would have liked. And it is a sensitive issue. It is a complicated issue. I am confident it can be resolved, and it will be resolved, in the way that many of these things are resolved, which is a good dose of goodwill on the part of everyone involved in the negotiations. I've made it clear both to the Gibraltarian government and to the Spanish government that, of course, the integrity of Gibraltar is an absolute non-negotiable. They know that, and as I say, the tone of the conversations is a positive one. As I say, I don't want to speculate on when this will be resolved, but it does strike me as an eminently soluble problem.
Could you tell us which parts of the negotiations have been the subject of agreement so far and which are yet to be resolved?
I suppose, like a lot of things, it's the devil in the detail. You've been probably a bit closer to it. Is that something, rather than me talk about generalities, perhaps Julian could highlight a couple of areas where it's stuck?
So, I mean, the negotiations, I think they've had 7 rounds so far. We've had 7 rounds so far, which, of course, with the European Commission. But the basis for the negotiations are the joint agreement between the UK and Spain reached at the end of 2020. I mean, these rounds have sort of cleared away the rest, and at the nub is the issue around mobility, and particularly implementing the agreement between us and the Spanish about how Schengen would work, and the involvement of the degree to which this would be, Spanish officials would be involved in that, and how it would be managed in a way that was seamless. And there was an agreement in the joint agreement on how that would work, and that is where we're sort of focusing down in the negotiations now.
We've had reports recently of British citizens being refused entry to Spain at the border with Gibraltar if they can't provide so-called valid reasons for entry. Is this a toughening of the Spanish approach, would you say, in order to try to put more pressure upon the Gibraltarian and British side in these negotiations?
That's not the tone that I'm picking up in the conversations that I have had. I've not seen those specific reports, and people crossing borders on occasions have difficulties. That is, it's undesirable, but it is a byproduct of the administrative processes that you have at borders. I've not seen those specific reports, so therefore I wouldn't want to go further on that. But
you've certainly not been notified of any change of policy or stance by the Spanish in terms of admission of British citizens. Not that's been brought to my attention either by our side or notified by the Spanish. And as I say, the conversations that I've had with my Spanish opposite number of, we're at a position where we speak frankly, but in a very friendly manner. And I am not detecting anything that would lead me to believe that there is a formal or mandated toughening of their position on this. Could I ask you about the role of the European Court of Justice, which I guess is problematic in these negotiations? On the 1st of December last year, the Prime Minister said that he saw no future role for the ECJ in relation to Gibraltar. Can you confirm to the committee that any agreement with the EU over Gibraltar will preclude any role for the European Court of Justice?
Well, I mean, we've had. I think the point to make is that the Gibraltar border and, for example, Northern Irish border with Ireland, very, very different set of circumstances. There's always been a customs and immigration border between the UK and Gibraltar, for example. So it's a different beast. In terms of in terms of the ECJ, we don't believe there's a need for EU law to apply directly, and therefore we don't feel the need to have oversight of EU institutions like the ECJ in this instance.
And is that a red line in the negotiation?
I I don't think it'd be good to negotiate by proxy in a different room, but I mean this is a long-standing position of the UK government. I don't think that is any kind of surprise to the EU or the Spanish.
We took evidence from your predecessor, Wendy Morton, back in September last year, and we expressed our concern about EU proposals for Gibraltar to align with some EU laws and for any agreement to include level playing field commitments. Does that remain a concern of the British government?
Do you think?
I mean, the original mandate did indeed have these sort of elements in it. I think one of the progress that has been made in these negotiations is we have sort of made progress on that. In particular, the sort of UK-Spain political framework agreement on which these negotiations are based does not mention any role for the European Court of Justice. So we're now narrowing it down to particularly around the mobility issues. Those are the Schengen Border Code. The Schengen Border Code is obviously an EU, well, it's a Schengen-wide code, but the issues around the mobility, I think, is the area where now this debate is taking place.
And alignment with EU legislation?
Well, we don't think, as I say, with our political framework with the Spanish, we don't think that there's a need for the European Court of Justice to play a role at all.
And is the position, so far as that is concerned, the same for both the United Kingdom government and the Gibraltar government? Are the two governments on the same page in that negotiating approach?
We have been, well, yeah, we're very much aligned.
Yeah, I think.
Thank you very much.
I have one last question, and it's, as you may know, we've recently launched an inquiry into the UK's EU representation. And after Brexit, can you explain what the government's strategic aims and objectives are in respect of the UK mission to the EU?
Yes, so as you and the committee will know, the formal status of the team in Brussels changed from UKREP to UKMIS. So they're a mission rather than representation. I was with them just yesterday, and they of course then become more like our ambassadorial presences in other institutions in other parts of the world. They seek to influence, they seek to explain, they seek to uphold our interests. I think we have a very effective team over there. Obviously, during the departure from the EU, it became quite a big organisation, because there was a lot of technical stuff to do. It has, as we've bit by bit resolved and put behind us some of those work streams, the mission has gently reduced in size quite organically, reflecting the fact that these things have been resolved. I don't have a final figure for what the head count will necessarily be, but it's getting now down towards the kind of sustainable size, which will be the team that we have in place, as I say, to explain, to influence, and to uphold our interests. And that, as is the case of any British post overseas, that is the fundamental role of the mission over there in Brussels.
And of course, for those people who are watching this as we go forward in this exchange at the moment, it's significantly different from UKREP, the United Kingdom Permanent Representatives. I've been on this committee since 1985, and I've seen a huge change. We did go over to see Lindsay Appleby and the others, and we had an extremely informative 2 days, which was extremely welcome. So, to put on record our thanks to the team there for what they did.
Thank you.
You'll also be aware, and this is the last question, that Lord Frost, when he was in post, committed to appear before us quarterly, and the Foreign Secretary will appear at least once a year. Will you make up the difference and appear before us 3 times a year? And to commit to appear before the summer recess, because there's so much going on at the moment, Mr. Cleverly, that there is massive decision taking in the pipeline. We've got the House being prorogued, we've got the Queen's speech on the 10th of May, just to get that clear that you will appear, because we ask questions which are based on a lot of expertise and knowledge from our staff and so on and so forth. So perhaps you could recognise that by making sure that you do come back again.
Our team, I know my team are working with your fantastic committee clerks in terms of making sure there is a sustainable, because what I would never want to do is to commit to something that I then fall short of. I think we're discussing about how to make sure we have a regular pattern of engagement, because you say there are still lots of moving parts, lots going on. I think we're quite close to just nailing that down. As you say, I know the Foreign Secretary has committed to appear at least once a year. I would envisage I will be envisaging me appearing before you a couple of times a year in addition to that. In terms of sitting down in front of the committee again before the summer recess, I think that's entirely reasonable. I still a phrase from my my previous Middle East portfolio that a number of the issues that we've discussed today, inshallah, will have been resolved by the time we head towards the summer recess, and I might indeed want to update the committee on the movement on a number of the issues that we've discussed today, and I'll let my office know that is my desire and intention, diary management committing. But as I say, our desire is to make sure that between the Foreign Secretary and myself, we do have that regular rhythm of engagement with the committee.
And as I started at the beginning of this session, noting the fact, as you agreed, that you have this enormously wide responsibility, interactive throughout many parts of the world, as well as with Northern Ireland, with Gibraltar, and also with the United States and with the EU as a whole. So it's a very wide-ranging series of responsibilities, and I'd just like to put on record the fact that I personally have found this an extremely interesting insight from somebody who's had to take on a lot of complexity as well as depth. So thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Sir. Thank you.
The proceeding has ended. 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 The proceeding has ended.